Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, where we discuss issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. You see, today is the 9th of November. It is now 6 p.m. It is 2021. But on the 9th of May at 6 p.m. in 1950, the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European house in which today 500 million Europeans live together in peace. I consider this to be the defining moment of post-war Europe, for it launched the European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. And there has been unprecedented peace between EU member states ever since, as this chart graphically shows. It was Robert Schuman's personal faith that prompted him to enter the public square to promote peace, reconciliation, and justice. His faith shaped his lifestyle and his politics. Now, that's going to be our starting point, as it is in all of our Schuman talks, as I interview our guest tonight, Thomas Schirrmacher, who's the General Secretary, or the Secretary General, of the World Evangelical Alliance. Thomas is a lot of things, actually. He's the founder of the Martin Bucer Seminary that began in Bonn, but it's a whole network in different cities. He's a global human rights activist. He's the professor of theology. He's the president of the International Institute for Religious Freedom. He's the author of over 90 books. And I discovered recently, to my surprise, that he was actually a bishop in the Anglican Church. Welcome, Thomas. Good to have you with us tonight.
Yeah, but thank you for the invitation.
It's well, I think we've known each other for well over 10 years. And one of the things you have done for us in the Schuman Center, you've been an advisor and an encourager as we got underway. And although in recent years we've not had so much contact, and you've been very busy on the global scale. But you are based in Bonn, but you are also attending the climate summit in Glasgow these days, and we want to talk to you about that as well. So
I have to correct you for a minute. We know each other since the last century. The first things we did was the Hope for Europe conference many years back.
That's correct. That was 2001. Yes.
Yeah, but we started to prepare. I just looked this up. We started to prepare this in 1998, 1999.
Yes. Yeah. So we go back to last millennium even. Yes.
Yeah.
And now, before we get into our first serious question, tell me the story of how you became an Anglican bishop, because you are a German, you live in Germany, and yet you've become an Anglican bishop.
Well, of course, God's ways sometimes are a bit strange. When we started out Martin Bucer Seminary, and we looked for partners around the world for accreditation, it was Anglican seminaries that started to work with us. And Anglican seminaries typically have a well-known Anglican from history at their name. So Archbishop Schirrmacher or someone like this. And of course, here in Germany, it would have been a little awkward to use an Anglican theologian. So I knew that it was Martin Bucer, who originally is the reformer of Strasbourg, and at his lifetime was known as much as Luther and Calvin. He actually is the first and most important student of Luther. So after already in 1518, he became a leading reformer at the so-called Leipzig discussions of Luther. And he is the spiritual father of John Calvin. This is, by the way, the reason why he also was the first ever person that got a European stamp. because he was active in French, in German, in England, in English language, and all over the place. Yeah, and he never cared for any borders within Europe. And he had been active here in Bonn to introduce the Reformation into the Archdiocese of Cologne. Yeah, and the Archbishop had told him, change the theology, but don't change what people see. Yeah. And so he wrote altogether 7,000 pages how to change the Catholic Church here in totally lonely, because all the other former reformers protested and said this is Catholic, they become Protestants or they leave it. Later Melanchthon came here and found out that the Reformation was underway. It died finally because the Bavarian troops came, took the Archbishop captive, threw Martin Bucer out. He finally fled to England, to his old friend Archbishop Cranmer. He had friends everywhere, yeah. Became a professor in Cambridge, and he came with those 7,000 pages. And just that moment, Cranmer had gotten the task to do exactly the same in England, yeah. To make the church a Protestant church, but keep everything people could see and where they could get nervous. Yeah, and thus the Anglican Church, and this is how Anglicans see it. The Anglican Church actually is a program that Martin Bucer brought to England, and Cranmer said, "Hallelujah, keeps me a lot of time, saves me a lot of time. Let's do that." Yeah, and so Martin Bucer became a nice name for our seminary. Being a European, we were planned to go for all of Europe anyway, so a good European name and a good Anglican name. And in this, during this development, I got ordained in London as pastor of what is called the Reformed Episcopal Church, which is a split of the Anglican Church, a conservative Bible-believing version. It's in England. It's called the Free Church of England. In US, where the Anglican Church is called Episcopal Church, it's the Reformed Episcopal Church. Yeah, and it was the later development when this whole awkward topic came up that in the US the Anglican Church started to consecrate a bishop that was a practicing homosexual, and all those splits started. All this split off of the Anglican churches returned into the Anglican Church, but into the conservative part of it. Yeah, so suddenly I found myself as being an ordained Anglican minister. Now. The other connection actually doesn't go through Anglicans, but through the charismatic connection. There was a group of charismatic apostolic leaders around the globe that have been pushing for me to take a global role. For a long time, I didn't have a global role like I have it today, and they were pushing for me and saying there were prophecies and whatever Pentecostals do if they want to get you to do something. Yeah, and at some point, they asked me and said, we would like to consecrate you as a bishop to be ready for something coming.
Okay.
And we wanted to do it totally under the radar, which totally failed, because a week later, I happened to attend the Vatican Synod in the Vatican, and Pope Francis got to know about it and told all the people present that I'm a bishop now. And so nothing was under the radar. And this is the picture you will show in some minutes that actually comes from that's around this time. Well, I think God had prepared this strange mix out of charismatic Pentecostal connection and Anglican connection for a very purpose. My wife and I, all our love, our first love really were converts from Islam to Christianity. And you surely know that I have been working with the persecuted church all my life, and I knew the peak of persecution is the fate of converts from Islam to Christianity. Afghanistan is the latest example how difficult that is. Yeah. and they really take the heat more than any other group. Yeah. And this goes back deep into my life because I wanted to become a missionary in Indonesia. And I still have close connections to a lot of Muslim leaders in Indonesia because it's the only country where we have a large number of converts from Islam to Christianity that were not killed. Yeah. And nowadays they have millions of former Muslims that worship in different churches. Okay, back. And I had been helping this movement, and we had regular meetings near Stuttgart in Schönblick. We will meet in 2 weeks again, and where they would come to a huge conference on persecution of Christians, and we always would sit at the side and make plans. And I made a nice plan for them, because their big problem was, they said, if we go on like this, we will split into hundreds of evangelical denominations. Everybody wants us for their newsletters. By the best, terrorist becomes a Christian. Many of them have been very evil guys in their former lives. I said, but we want to stay together, and we do not want to decide whether we want to be old-fashioned Christians from Reformation times or Pentecostals or anything in between. We don't want to split. And the thing is that, of course, this is the history of the World Evangelical Alliance. In 1846, Anglican priests, Lutheran pastors, Presbyterian state church pastors from Scotland reached out to everything that was new at that time. Of course, it was not the Pentecostals, it even was not the Salvation Army yet in 1846, but every strange movement on the market. And they said that we have to reach the world together. That, of course, was a big criticism of state churches, of the existence of state churches. And the Alliance became the first big movement for religious freedom. And so I said the Anglican way is the only way that keeps the old and the new together, for a very simple reason. Their confession is not, first of all, a written confession, where you write 50 lines and then you can no longer cooperate to somebody who wrote a little different 50 lines. But they say our confession is what we do in the worship service. So what we pray there, what we say there, what we say around, let's say, the Lord's Supper, that is our confession, and not what is somewhere on paper. And this is the beginning of the evangelical movement around the world. I mean, I can travel not only to the 600 million that officially belong to us, but far beyond. I can visit a rather unusual Pentecostal church in Alaska and go to the Lord's Supper. And many evangelicals, Pentecostals, Baptists don't know how unusual this is. The World Council of Churches does not have this. The churches do not accept each other when it comes to the Lord's Supper. Because our test whether you belong to our family is we worship together and then we know. And that first of all, that we check papers. And I would agree that if you believe that Christians are sinners and should repent, this is only true if you do it in your worship service. If you have it on paper and in the worship you do as if you are the cream on top of humanity, that does not work. So, and to make a long story short, preaching this, I had no clue that I was telling them something which would fall back on me, because one day they came and said, we want to go this way, but we need somebody who leads it, or who especially can be a showcase. And this movement, meanwhile, has 1 million Muslim background believers. It's called the Communio Messianica. And my role is to represent it to churches around the world, because we have a leadership body, the so-called ruling council of 12 leaders, each one coming from a different culture: Arab, Persian, Turk, Indonesia, Turkish I mentioned already, and so on. Every one of the 12 represents a different culture of Islam background, but most of them cannot show up in public. Yeah, and so I have the privilege that I'm the one that shows up in public, and this is the real role of my life. It's not the Secretary General, but this is where I see God working in a way that hasn't been the case 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and it changes the whole landscape, our world, from within. Yeah.
Now,
it's
Thomas,
not
I haven't even asked you my first question, and we've already been all around the
Yeah,
world.
okay.
I knew we were going to go in all sorts of different directions.
Yeah. Well, you did not know by asking me about this that
Yes.
for me, being an Anglican is not a confessional thing. It's just the opposite, the chance to get out of all those fights. And in the moment it works. And so you asked me about who I am. So
That's right.
That's the problem. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to touch on quite a few big topics, and I'm going to go right back now to where I said our starting point was, to Robert Schuman. And 11 years ago, I published the book Deeply Rooted: The Story of Robert Schuman, and you saw the draft of that, and immediately I volunteered to write an introduction to it as the son of a former German officer. My father was a YMCA officer with the British 8th Army in the Middle East. And so that was very special that you offered to write that. So I want to come back to Robert Schuman's vision.
Yeah. So here it is. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's
up. How to do this. This is the book, and this is my preface.
Yes. Let's put this question up for the watchers to see. Robert Schuman's vision for a community of peoples was conceived when Christendom was still intact in much of Western Europe. Now, that's obviously not true today. So how relevant is his vision of Europe as a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values still for us today? Thomas, what is your opinion?
Well, I wrote my foreword to your book not just because I thought your conclusions were nice, but because I have read a lot of things from Robert Schuman. One, of course, is The City of Konrad Adenauer. My personal assistant is a specialist he's an historian and a specialist on Adenauer for decades. He would guide people through the house of Adenauer and tell the story of it. And it's, of course, very closely related. I think it is very relevant because it has to do with the whole question of democracy. And Robert Schuman, one of his major statements was that democracy does not work without Christian values. Yeah, that if it would not be built on Christian values, he did not say on Christians. Yeah.
Yes. I think he said on democracy must be Christian, or it will not be. It will become tyranny or anarchy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that is the major thing, and that of course also goes into the history of democracy. And I think what Schuman, Adenauer, and others at that time, having the Second World War just behind them, understood is that originally the democracy really was built around certain Christian values. Some of them even Christians do not know any longer. So, for example, when we vote, the original idea was not that by voting we find better people. Yeah. The voting process in itself doesn't make the candidates good or bad, and it does not automatically assure that the better of the candidates is voted in. But the original idea was that you can get with a vote, you can get rid of the old government. Yeah, and you can see this in Africa still today, that the test for democracy is if the opposition leader is voted in. Yeah, then suddenly it is the test whether the old one goes. And in Africa, most every time, the old guy is voted out of office because of corruption. Yeah, and corruption for Schuman, for Adenauer, for those, they knew that was a theological term. That is the corrupted heart. Yeah, it's deeply in us. So they were guys. They knew you don't need to wait for the one or the other politician to misuse power. It's part of our nature, and democracy guarantees a check and balances that no one is too powerful. And the US proves us as a country of democracy the problems if one man is too powerful. I wish they had an easy way to change their constitution to cut this down a little bit. And that includes there needs to be a way for a non-bloody revolution. Yeah. So democracy, first of all, for them was the people have the chance to get rid of evil people without needing to do a revolution or to kill them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
and
this is the check and balances. And this is this is a very relevant thing. And I regret to say this very clearly. I regret that two things happened. Number one, the churches in Europe went through, they went through a process which no other than the presiding bishop of the German Protestant church, the EKD as we call it, Evangelische Kirche in Deutschland, which, let's say, probably for times has been the most liberal church in the world. Yeah, but he said what this church did was a self-secularization. So they were not secularized because people left them or because they were influenced by society, but they always were ahead of society and secularized themselves. Did always more than they were asked for. Yeah. And this included that often they were the first to speak up against, and it's especially the Protestants, of course, said, oh, this whole Christian democracy is a Catholic idea, which is utter nonsense. The Protestants even should be more in favor of it, because sin plays a much bigger role in our theology than it does in Catholic theology. Yeah. And after all, among other things, Luther protested against the corruption in Rome. It took 500 years until the Pope himself said Rome is the most corrupt place in the world. Yeah, so that should be on our mindset. So on the one side, we have the Protestant churches, the mainline, the former state churches in Europe, that through this process, all throughout the idea that the European Union tries to keep the best of the Christian history. Yeah. At the same time, the evangelicals, so those who did not go for a self-secularization, started out to use the fact that most of them were Catholics, with some theories that this is connected to Rome, to the whore of Babylon and the Antichrist and all those things. And it is, for me, a very sad development that the people, the evangelicals, by starting those strange theories, which all are gone meanwhile, all the ideas that the European Union could be the Antichrist, or that the Soviet Union is the Antichrist and takes over here, or that Europe will fight a war against Israel. All of this has been overrun by real history. Yeah, none of all of those prophecies is on the market. Nevertheless, it led to the same process, that those people who had the faith to assure and still have it. Think of Buitinen, who assured that the whole leadership of the EU had to leave. Yeah. Because of corruption. I think this evangelical spirit is still around and could achieve a lot. That those people withdraw and said, we don't want to have anything to do with the European Union. They even are not seeing the European Union just as a bulk of states. Yeah, I personally would say Romans 13 says, okay, we follow the state until the point where the state wants us to disobey God, then it's over. Yeah. So for me, the European Union, as well as the United Nations, is just a pile of states, and it's as good as the average of our states. Yeah. So and so in the European Union, there are very positive things where our states are positive, and very evil things. Yeah. But that was not the base. The base was to say it is so evil that we should withdraw. Yeah. And I've been fighting for a representative of the European Evangelical Alliance in Brussels. And we owe a lot to this office and to the specific persons, but especially altogether for the office. And they have done very positive things for all believers, all evangelicals and other believers in Europe. And they just ignored. Yeah, if the majority just would send them, I don't know where. They don't want this kind of representations in Brussels because it's all evil. Yeah. So and those two sides assured that it was the churches who no longer backed the vision of Schuman, Adenauer, and those people. Yeah. And then of course you do not have a real chance. And now, with all their self-fulfilling prophecies, they now come and say, "Oh, look at this! Yeah, we knew it." Yeah, I mean, the European Union is a place of lobbying. It's a place of parliamentarians. It's a place like any other place where you can work for anything you want. But if you withdraw, your position will just disappear. And I still think it is very relevant. In Germany, the last of the big Christian democratic parties now is disappearing. I'm not a prophet. I don't know whether it comes back. And of course, Mrs. Merkel in her last years, people would say, oh, that's far away from Konrad Adenauer. And of course, things have changed a lot. But in principle, it has been the last party that stood for this old idea. And it revived from my point of view because the Protestants took over this vision at the same time and did not leave it to the Catholics, where it was before the Second World War. So they really took up this vision. Yeah. But without the Christian backing, it will not work. I'm convinced if we still would be built on Christian values, which are values even non-Christians can agree on, we would not need all those right-wing parties. Most of them speak up against Islam and say, we want to save the Christian Occident or whatever, which of course is utter nonsense because none of those movements is a Christian movement. They speak for Christianity, but they have no clue what that is. But if we would have stayed with those values, if the mainline churches and the evangelicals would have backed this vision, we would not have those right-wing movements nowadays. Yeah.
Now, Thomas, I don't think you would be aware of the fact that I recently wrote a dissertation, a comparative analysis of evangelical views on European integration, to look into how do evangelicals across Europe actually view this. And my findings were very similar to what you have been mentioning, that actually both ignorance and indifference play a very, very big role. And something certainly needs to change in that. And perhaps it's a topic we can come back to on another occasion, because we do need to address this. It is a serious blind spot in the evangelical constituency. But I'm going to change gear now, and we're going to go to Glasgow. And to the climate change conference, something that's been very much on your mind, and not only in your mind, on the minds of other leaders of different Christian traditions, Pope Francis, Patriarch Bartholomew, Archbishop Welby, and you've been meeting with them on this subject, I believe. And you're attending the conference for a few days yourself. How should Christians relate to this conference? Of course, many are very skeptical about it. What's your expectation?
Well, let me start at the beginning, because of course I'm convinced that evangelicals in all of history never agreed on politics. And I do not see how they could. Yeah. When in 1846 the Anglicans, Lutherans, I mentioned this, reached out to the then Methodist, later the Salvation Army, later the Pentecostal movement. Every new movement was just put into what is now the World Evangelical Alliance. The only thing they could center around was the gospel. It's Jesus, of course, as the center of the gospel, the revelation of God the Father in his Son, Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. What he did for the world. They could agree, therefore, on preaching the gospel everywhere in unity. They agreed on the backside of it, which is religious freedom, so that there should be no force, no anything, no pressure. The state and any power should keep out of what is the deepest conviction of the people, which included accepting, and with the New Testament, of course, that's a given for us, that if we tell people about Jesus and they deny him, we have no authority to punish them or to call them idiots or whatever. And a good evangelical even does not really know why he became a Christian, despite many others, yeah, but knows that this is the grace of God. And if you talk to two siblings where one has become a believer and one not, and ask the believer how he explains that he is a believer and his brother or his sister is not, normally they have no explanation. Yeah, and but we already could not agree on baptism. The Evangelical Alliance is a movement that has the major pedo-Baptist churches in its camp as much as the churches with adult baptism. And we were willing to...
Those who baptize children, pedo-Baptists.
Yeah. So we were willing to put this on the second, to put this, set this back. Yeah. And say the task is that we want to preach the gospel. Yeah. And that is number one. And baptism is important. And the local church, of course, somehow has to solve it. But it may not keep us from unity. Yeah. And that yeah. So if we come to politics, and of course this all follows scripture as what I call the constitution of evangelicals. Yeah. So, but if you take scripture in hand, what can you say about politics? You have a principal idea that God wants the state, which is important, yes, but he wants us to work under the state as far as possible until the point where you have to say we need to obey God more than the state. Yeah.
Now you're on your way to Glasgow, right?
Yeah. But if you go beyond this, how do you know where to build a motorway and where not with the Bible in hand? Yeah. So we have when it comes to Glasgow, what we have is a clear message from the first chapter of the Bible. Human beings have been put by God into this world as they have been entrusted with this world. Yeah. And they have given the ability to think, to work, so that they can change things and at the same time preserve creation.
What I hear you saying is that the Bible doesn't give specific answers to a lot of questions.
No. But we have to say, we work on a base where we more than anybody else are convinced that we are stewards of this creation. And you only really can do it if you believe in a creation. Yeah. So we do not need to fear any discussion. And this is independent. Whether you believe, I mean, the climate change is obvious that it takes place, but in how far we believe that this is man-made. Now, in the World Evangelical Alliance, we have many alliances that live in countries that definitely have a man-made climate change. So think about in Central Asia, the Aral Sea, that nowadays has 3% of the water it had 50 years ago. Yeah. And it's 11 countries that directly, so the alliance there come and say, we need to talk about this, we need help. So, and then we started the first chapter of the Bible. And Ethiopia, they do make a dam and Egypt and many other countries, Sudan, suddenly have no water, and it changes the whole country, the whole climate in the country. Yeah. So if you talk to them, is there man-made climate change? They say, of course. What do we do? Yeah. So, so I want to get out of this. We only engage with on this whole topic because the UN puts out a report that, the fact that we have a responsibility is that we know much more than our grandfathers. Yeah. Who in Glasgow would use coal, all the houses became black, and nobody had an idea that our lungs do become black too. They and they even proudly saw this as a sign of an industrial city, that it became black. Yeah, and we now know that some of them even killed themselves without knowing. Yeah, so we know a lot of more. And the second thing that we as Christians have to bring into the whole story, that if you find that things went wrong and you want to change them, it is more than a new command. It is more than to force people. It's not more than to have more new laws. And especially it doesn't work if you blame others. And this is what the world is doing at the moment. Everybody is blaming everybody for being, So, and the interesting thing, we had a pre-conference in Marseille, on biodiversity, and Cardinal Turkson for the Vatican, and I was there to represent Christianity. And so
you mean you were there to represent the evangelicals when you say Christianity? The cardinal was there.
Well, they said that we represent Catholics and Protestants. Yeah, they were not interested in the details. Yeah, so So nevertheless, I was asked, well, why do you speak so often about sin when it comes to those questions? And I said, take racism as an example. We deeply believe racism is not just something you can forbid. Yeah, it's deeply rooted in our corrupt heart. And if there is no racism around, or if every racism has become too expensive or forbidden, we invent a new one. I use Belgium as an example, who suddenly think that they have two different races in the countries. And 100 years ago, their grandparents didn't know anything about that. Yeah. So it's and that happens again and again. And I said, so we need a deep change of our inner heart, of our nature, which in my tradition we call conversion. Yeah, and which only can be done by God. And the interesting thing is, they asked immediately Cardinal Turkson what he thinks about his Protestant colleague, and he first said, "Okay, it's something that has to go deeper." And then he said, "Okay, I have to admit, probably conversion is the right term for it." And so we feel that in the climate change conference, we represent 600 million people, so how they will behave tomorrow will have a lot to do with the future in this area. But that we, at the same time, we have to remind people from our background that it is not just making laws. That we have to talk about greed, we have to talk about envy, all those things that create societies with incredible rich people who spill the money out of the window, and that we do not capture this. So I feel at the same time like a missionary there, talking about those things, as someone who backs a lot of the initiatives that come from there, which I think are very good, especially for those countries who already have the climate change and don't know how to cope with it.
Now, I mentioned that you had met with the Pope and the Patriarch and the Archbishop. What was your combined message to the COP26?
Well, if you read the document that we worked on for 6 months together, and we met. We had the big guys we had meetings with scientists of all camps for again and again, virtually, of course, and with the statement where we come up is it includes the message I already outlined. That
can we find that Can we find a link somewhere for that?
Yes, I don't have it here written on my hand, so but I can provide this. Yes, yeah.
But
and
okay, we'll provide that. Yeah,
yeah, and that was this message, and then of course we spelled out that there are certain countries that are in the middle of the mess already. If you take Bangladesh, where you have those big floodings every year, and half a centimeter more of the sea means huge areas that are flooded. Yeah, and we have to do something about it, no matter whether this really is man-made in all details, or we cannot just leave the people in the. And this was handed over in the Vatican with all of us present to the president of COP26 and other leaders of 26 who were there and took it over directly. And of course, some Italian politicians and So
how urgent is the situation? How urgent?
Yeah, and I had the privilege to congratulate the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, now Istanbul, the head of the Orthodox churches, because who is called the Green Patriarch, because 25 years ago he wrote a document on this very thing, and he said that the Christians have to take up the topic, the Christians have to take the lead, because in the end, you only can save this planet if you see it as God's creation and us as stewards. Yeah, it will not be possible to see this just as a secular project, and this is what we are realizing now in reality. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in your opinion, how urgent is this all?
I mean, it depends.
It's 1 minute to 12 or something, or was that Boris Johnson, who was one of the two?
I mean, those friends who say this will be right or wrong in very few years, so we will see it then. Yeah, it's hard because when it comes to the speed and what will happen. It depends which of the scientists you ask, and even in the UN report, you normally have 4 different graphs, which give 4 different perspectives, and then if you ask the scientist which one is probably the one that comes, you get totally different answers. Yeah. But what is important for me, and as General Secretary General of the World Evangelical Alliance, we have 143 countries officially on board, and of course others where we have partners. I have to stress, we definitely have countries where we are beyond 12 o'clock already. Yeah. I just visited 2 weeks ago the Seychelles, this island belonging to Africa. Neighbor countries, Mauritius, Madagascar,
to the west of India.
Yeah, it is not a country you can compare to China and India by numbers. Yeah, but their situation is, and the president is a former Anglican priest, and really interested in bringing in the Christian perspective. He brought down corruption very, very strongly. Within 3 years, the Seychelles became number 1. That is the best position in no corruption in Africa. But he says we are totally unprepared. We have 500 square kilometers of inhabited land and own 2 million square meters of ocean. Yeah. And what are we as Christians doing about this ocean? Yeah,
but this that's a heavily Muslim country. I'm surprised to hear that it's got a president who's a Christian in the Seychelles.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
It was very interesting, and the Evangelical Alliance in the moment represents about already 12% of the population, and growing fast. Yeah. So, but for them, they say that the question is totally new, but it's extremely urgent.
Yes.
Because suddenly there's signs that things in the ocean, that biodiversity is gone. And you have a special problem. I'm sitting in front of a big church, and they ask me for funds because they cannot pay for the electricity. And the electricity comes from oil brought over from the United Arab Emirates, which, of course, at the same time brings Muslim influence. And I'm standing there in the heat, in the sun. Yeah, I think, isn't that strange? Yeah, they have the free electricity, and so we started to discuss with them how we can bring solar panels on all the churches. Yes. And to be frank, I do not really care whether this is saving their funds. Or whether this is climate change. Yeah, it's a very real situation. Yes. And it's really utter nonsense, no matter where you stand, utter nonsense to bring oil from the United Arab Emirates to the Seychelles to produce electricity. That's really an absolute waste of resources. Yeah, and of course makes the country unnecessarily dependent on a Muslim nation. Yeah. And so I mentioned the Aral Sea, I mentioned all the countries that do not have enough drinking water and where the situation becomes worse. And so, for example, we have a university in Germany that is investing a lot of money to see how Germany can bring its drinking water to places where there is no drinking water. Yeah? Germany has about 20 times as much drinking water as we need. Our population is not growing, definitely not. Yeah. And if they ask, if you ask now, is this a good thing? I would say it's a good thing anyway. Even if we find out that things were not so urgent as we thought, this is an urgent matter. Yeah. We have places where there is not enough drinking water. Yeah, and have to think for this.
You've brought us back to Germany, and you mentioned Angela Merkel before. So let's switch track again. And you have had, both you and your wife have had a lot of personal contact, I believe, with the Chancellor. And now she's leaving not only the German political stage, but the European political stage and the world political stage. And she's leaving quite a gap. What would you understand her legacy to have been?
Well, I have to be cautious that I don't do too much party politics now, because, of course, her history is very much related to the Christian Democratic Union here in Germany, and I'm a member of this party. Actually, I've been for a long time been a senior advisor on religious freedom for the party. Let me start on a very personal level. Yes. I think that Mrs. Merkel is the last politician that represents the generation of Schuman, Adenauer, and those people. Why? Because she proves that she is the anti-politician, so to speak. Yeah, she never cared about how she looks. Yeah. In a time where photos about the candidates, filming, I mean, where the election is a visual election, she proved that you can become a top leader by not caring for it. And she always joked that if this would be a contest in how you look like, the Germans should have voted Claudia Fischer as their chancellor, not her. Yeah. She proved that you can become a top leader without ever denigrating other politicians. In all her time, in all her time, she always has discussed content, and there she has disagreed. But in the whole time, from before, when she still was in opposition, in the last millennium, my first encounter with her was 1999, when she still was in opposition, till now when she ends. Not one day she said something nasty about the French president or the Chinese president or somebody in election. Yeah, and this was true of people like Schuman and Adenauer too, who out of Christian conviction did not see an election campaign as, of course, the US is the utmost opposite of what I'm talking about. Yeah. And one would have said it's impossible if you do that. It's impossible to become a top leader. And the voters have accepted this. The same is true for corruption. The idea that Mrs. Merkel now secretly has a bank account in Switzerland and is a very rich person, she has been the walking anti-corruption. And she has kicked anyone out near to her circle who mixed being in the government with working for a company. And if you think that her predecessor, Schröder, minutes after he had stepped out of being a chancellor, became what is Aufsichtsratsmitglied, head of a stock company owned by Russia, and earned incredible money by working for Russia and Russian companies since then. Yeah, she has been the exact opposite. You can visit her home in Berlin. It's in a house with many flats, and it's the name of her husband. If you want to ring, if you look around, so you see some policemen.
Yeah,
but she
you
still
mean
lives.
it's an apartment block of which they live in one apartment. They don't have.
And it's this is the apartment in which she moved when she still was unknown and moved to Berlin. She never got a bigger place.
Instead on the top of the chancellery there. Yeah.
No. And when she goes on holiday, she goes to places where everybody goes. She doesn't have any expensive special places where she goes to. Yeah. So, and I once was in Moldavia, and there was a campaign, and there was a photo. The place of the chancellor of the richest country in Europe, and you would see this flat. Yeah. And the palace of the prime minister of the poorest country in Europe, and you would see Moldavia, and he has a palace of more than 200 rooms where he lives. Yeah, so I think a lot of people understood this, and that's really on a personal level, whether you like some of her decisions or not. She had to work in coalition with ever-changing political parties all her life. Yeah. So and this led to decisions which she probably even doesn't like herself. Yeah. But what I think we will be missing is I see her as the last politician of this kind. Perhaps in future someone will come up again, but I don't see anybody on the European scene who really takes the risk to live out this personal value as a politician, stick to it for more than 2 decades. Yeah. And I see that the voters, that politicians, and that includes her role in Europe and on the world stage. Yeah. She never took herself too serious. She is known for sitting down and listening to everyone. Her enemies have said she cannot. She is not willing to take decisions. She waits and waits and waits. She takes the decision too late. But by her personality, she listens to everyone first before she takes a decision. And it was a nightmare for the Christian Democratic Union that more than once she said, the proposal of our party is not the best. The best is what this and this party says, this will we do. And the other parties also hated it. Yeah, because often she stole their best ideas. Yeah, and I could give you examples from election campaigns in Germany where opposing parties would publish their ideas only some weeks before the election, so that Mrs. Merkel no longer could steal it. Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned controversial decisions that she made, and of course the opening of the floodgates for the 1 million Syrian refugees to come in continues to be controversial. I remember we met together in Brussels a few years ago, and you had your own perspective on that. Can you share that again?
Yeah. Well, you have to see that because it leads on to the question about Muslims in Germany, in Europe, and their future. It has led into huge fights, and But I would say two things. Number one, her most famous saying is Islam belongs to Germany. And a lot of people criticize this. You have to understand, she only said this because she is the only politician that says Christianity belongs to Germany and Jewish faith belongs to Germany. Yeah.
And she said the problem is not too much Islam, the problem is too little Christianity.
Yeah. So, but you have to see our left-wing party, the communists, the Green Party, the liberals, the social, they all would not even say that Christianity belongs to Germany. Mm-hmm. They want to have Christian and religion out of the way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And only because she says Christianity, and not only said it, but lived it, that Christianity especially what she always said is that the Christian view of man is built into our constitution. She also could say this. And the second thing, Mrs. Merkel, when she was criticized at the very beginning, when no one had any clue that taking in the first refugees would lead to 1 million refugees coming to Germany. Yeah, it was a situation that in Hungary, families with small children were on a motorway, and they were not allowed to go back and not to go forward. There was no water for them, and she said, "Bring them over, we will feed them." Yeah, and you have to see when those Syrians came. Thousands of Germans were standing in the railway stations in Munich, clapping, having toys for the children, etc. Because they really saw this as a lady acting in Christian convictions. And at that time, she said, I know it was a decision from my gut feeling. I just saw them, and I said, and I did this as a Christian. I cannot watch in TV how people are starving because somebody doesn't like them. Yeah. So I said, bring them over. Yeah. And she said, you know what? There are a lot of things which I did when I was a chancellor that I regret afterwards. This will be a thing that makes me sleep well in the night for the rest of my life. Yeah. So, yeah. And I know that's true. And the churches have backed what she has done. Always. And the interesting thing is, from the Evangelical churches to the mainline churches, the Catholic churches, all churches have backed this. Yeah. And they are the ones who actually work with the refugees. Yeah. I don't know what the political future of all of this will. What I know is she has brought many Christians from the Middle East to Germany. The percentage of Christians that were persecuted in Syria, Iraq is much higher than the percentage of them in their original countries. Yeah, and they are extremely thankful to her. And I see a revival going on under Muslims coming to Germany. Yeah. Now she could not know that, and that's not politics. Yeah. But I can see a certain wisdom why God did this, because we have, especially among the Iranians in our country, we have a real revival going on, which changes the landscape, because those guys do not go to evangelical churches where they belong to. Yeah, but they want to become Christians, so they go to the next clock tower that happens to be a Catholic church, a Protestant church. And I can tell you that it was for me an amazing moment. We had huge discussions because everybody knew they wanted to become Christians but had no clue what Christianity is. So all the churches together, including the Catholic Church, decided, an agreement much other, that everybody coming would have to go through a 3 months Alpha course. Yeah. And I thought by myself, God is doing some funny things here. Yeah. Yes. And so the Catholic Church, the Lutheran churches, and of course also the Assemblies of God and whatever there is, they all use this course, yeah, to introduce Christianity. And then you have those guys, most of the people want to be baptized in the end anyway. And I could give you stories of Lutheran churches, like here in my city, where for decades only babies have been baptized. And of course, babies don't show up and say, let me talk about Jesus. Yeah. And suddenly in nearly every service, they have Iranians baptizing, and they want to tell their story. And then the German pastor will tell them, oh, that's not usual. That's not in our liturgy. And they just don't care.
No testament.
They don't care. And they tell the people, you don't know what you have. Yeah, we did not have it. So it's really changing the whole landscape. Yeah. I don't know. That's not politics. That's a result of politics. But I think that to view the whole question through just the one lens, to say we get Muslims to Europe, and that is the end of Europe. Yeah, there I would quote Mrs. Merkel in Switzerland. She got an honorary degree, was public in state TV, in Swiss state TV, and a Swiss student asked her, "You are so open-minded to Muslims, should you not rather protect us?" Now, I find it a little funny that a Swiss citizen wants to be protected by the German chancellor. That was a bit misplaced, yeah, but nevertheless, asking the question. And are there not too many people reading the Quran? Doesn't this concern you? Yeah. And she answered, and I know that's her deepest conviction. Yeah. She said, I'm not concerned about that too many people read the Quran. I'm concerned about that that not enough people read the Bible, and that especially the Christians themselves no longer read the Bible. Yeah, and if we would read the Bible and we would convinced about it, we would not need to fear people coming from other countries. Yeah, and I think that's the truth. We have 5 or 6 million Muslims now in the country. If we would have vital churches, we would say, hallelujah. They come here and they hear the gospel, that's it. They would have no chance to really change the culture. Yeah? They are a threat because our culture and most of the European cultures have lost any direction. Yeah, it's an ad hoc political, who happens to be in power today, and a week later things change. Party conventions, you take a party and the party convention seems to go a different direction every time they meet. Meanwhile, often on a yearly base, we have parties that re-elect different leaders every year. Yeah, not to talk about countries like Italy, where the whole the party's landscape changes every 2 or 3 years. Yeah, there's no direction. We don't know what we defend. Yeah. And then, of course, this is a real threat. I always said when it comes to Turkey becoming a member of the European Union, there are good political reasons not to do this. And nowadays, anyway, yeah, we don't want all this dictatorship and so, but that the question probably is history anyway. Yeah, but I always said, if you only would take Germany, yeah, give me 1,000 convinced, vital young missionaries who can work in Turkey, because in the European Union you can work wherever you want, and Turkey will regret that they became a member of the European Union. Yeah, but we don't have those 1,000 young people who would do that. Yeah, and so I think that is. My wife once lectured in a German city. The mayor had invited her, so not a Christian event. Yeah, the mayor had invited her to speak on the future of Islam in Europe or in Germany. And a secular journalist made a big article out of it. So, and he had a heading going over 2 pages. Yeah. The heading was not Islam, but the condition of Christianity is a threat to Europe. Yeah. And my wife really laughed. I said, I did not say this with one word. But he understood what I really said.
Right, that was the implication. Yes.
Yeah, Yes. So, and I think that is, and you see, when saying Islam belongs to Germany, she always had the approach: if the people come to our country, we welcome them as guests.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And I think there could be good political reasons to close the border. But once you let the people into the country, it's a question whether you welcome them as guests and they have at least a chance to be part of the society, or whether you make them to your enemies the moment they cross the border. Yeah? And that's that has devastating results. They live here, they have to live here, they cannot go back, but they really, and I have to say, in Germany, the vast majority of Muslims do not hate Germany, but love Germany. Yeah, and I'm not naive. Don't misunderstand me. Yeah. But the right-wing people who built up a new right-wing party against Merkel, interestingly, more or less all come from the former communist Germany. That is from an area, and the people that want to save Christianity or the Christian Germany don't belong to churches themselves.
Yes.
Yeah? They grew up without Christianity. They have no clue what that is. They fight for Christianity because it's the opposite of Islam. Yeah. I like the thing we have here much more, that people start to think about Christianity anew, asking themselves, why is Christianity not as aggressive? Yeah. Why did Christians not kill atheists in masses and blow them up, but have cooperated nicely with them, as we have done in all European countries for quite some time? Yeah. So I'm quite sure that in 2 or 3 years, Europe will miss Mrs. Merkel extremely. Yeah. Because there's no one left that can moderate in Brussels. Yeah. And is not just working for its own interest. I don't say that Mrs. Merkel never worked for German interests, but in Brussels she always was able to distinguish between German interests. And in the moment, I only see politicians, Italy, France, wherever you look, I see politicians who try to get as much out of the box as they can, and don't care for the overall picture.
They're not concerned about the common good. Now, you've brought up a very important point here that I think is a point of hope. Hardly anybody thought that Angela Merkel was going to be in that position for a long time, and Helmut Kohl didn't. She thought she would be kind of a caretaker role. And so she has surprised everybody, and perhaps God has a surprise waiting for us as well. But I want to move on to our fourth question here. And you talked about the state of Christianity. And this involves your role as the General Secretary or the Secretary General of the WEA. Obviously, it also involves having cups of coffee with the Pope. And you've mentioned the meetings with the Ecumenical Patriarch in, they call it Constantinople, in Istanbul, with Bartholomew, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. And that in itself indicates a very hopeful sign of the convergence in Christianity that we have not had for 1,000 years. So how do you see your role as the WA Secretary General?
Well, I would say the easiest way to describe is to say that I come from the wrong country. If you go to the global south, the development is that the old historic churches, mainline churches, high speed are returning to their roots. And when I say they are becoming evangelical, I do not mean it in a confessional sense. I do not mean it in the sense that we have a race who has most of the people, but it's just the fact that Anglican churches, Lutheran churches in Africa no longer feel bound to the direction of their European mother churches, but go their own way. And if you go to Ethiopia nowadays, you have the old Lutheran church, Mekane Jesu church, that owes a lot to German missionaries. In between, followed some changes of the Lutherans here in Germany, but at some point cut the tie, losing millions of euros, which they would get every year. They cut the tie. They are still a member of the World Council of Churches historically, but they became a member of the Evangelical Alliance of Ethiopia. And when I go there, I see this funny thing that the Pentecostals and the Lutherans compete, who is more mission-minded, yeah? And they see this huge country of Sudan, their neighbor country, that is more or less unreached, yeah? And that captures somehow the new situation. I mean, that the Pentecostals are missionary-minded and want to do something that doesn't come as a surprise, yeah? But that a very traditional church keeps up. I have to tell you one story that captures this. I hope I do not offend any of the listeners. I was invited by the Lutheran World Fellowship to speak in Strasbourg, where they once a year they have a meeting, of course, pre-COVID-19. They have a meeting where they have pastors from all over the world and go through different ecumenical topics. So they invited me to speak on the topic they gave me: why do evangelical churches grow and Lutheran churches do not grow? Yeah. So I hesitated a bit whether I really want to talk about this, and it can be easily misunderstood. But then I suddenly had a genius strike how to start, and this is how I started. I said, this is the wrong title. The right title has to be, why do evangelical Lutheran churches grow and non-evangelical or anti-evangelical Lutheran churches not? You know what happened? 3/4 of the pastors there from all over the world got up and started to clap. Yeah? These were all the Lutheran pastors from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, who live in growing churches. Yeah? Mm. And there is no reason why an Anglican church, a Lutheran church, should not be able to grow. It will not grow if it follows this, what I called quite some time ago, self-secularization. But if they just take the gospel and put it in the center of the church, and put the Bible in the center of the church, etc., that has consequences. So, and now the wrong country. The situation is that around the globe, the evangelicals and WA as a global structure is seen as the second largest Christian body. This is how the Vatican sees it, how many others sees it. This is how the UN sees it, etc. And it's the fact in many countries we represent the majority of Protestants. And like let's say I mentioned Ethiopia, of course, if the mainline churches and the new churches come together and form an evangelical alliance, that is more or less all Protestants. Yeah?
You mentioned 600 million several times. That's the figure you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, 600 million, I have to say, some people say that's the number of evangelicals. So there are more evangelicals, Pentecostals, Baptists, and so. This is technically the number of the members of the church, in churches that belong to national alliances.
Okay, so there's more than that.
Yeah, so we have a lot of evangelicals, don't forget it, who are against unity. And I do not represent them. Yeah, we have Pentecostal churches who think their Pentecostalism is much better than normal Pentecostalism, and on the other side, we have right-wing prophets of eschatology who say you should not talk to anyone. You should. It's the small flock. A revival in itself is the sign of the Antichrist. It cannot be a real revival and stuff like this. Yeah? And they of course do not belong to us, and we even do not pretend to represent them. Yeah. No. So so this is where the number comes from. Yeah. And now. With the return of former mainline churches into this camp, and again, I'm not talking about a race or numbers or so here, but it's just the fact a growing number of the churches of the world that are members in the World Council of Churches are evangelical churches. Well, very simple. If the Anglican Church in Kenya suddenly has a charismatic, perhaps even Pentecostal archbishop, and the whole church starts to do mission, but they stay members of the World Council of Churches. Yeah. So sometimes I'm talking to myself when I'm in Geneva. Yeah. So, and
so evangelical Catholics don't figure in that 600 million. But
No. That's experts divide the Catholic Church into the traditionalists. This is normally the easiest way to find them is to look for pilgrimages to some places where you can worship Mary. Yeah. So in Latin America, Spain, you will find them all over the world. Then the liberals. Germany is one of the peaks of a liberal Catholicism that on paper sticks to what the Pope says, but in reality has given up on all those moral topics and doesn't believe that the Bible is true, etc., etc. And what is called the Evangelical wing. And the Evangelical wing is on the one side the charismatics in the Catholic Church, and it is a growing number of first-generation Christians. Yeah. So in Africa, the Catholic Church is growing vastly, but the people doing evangelism are not the traditionalists and not the liberals. Yeah, but evangelicals themselves. So, for example, one thing you can see is that Mary plays a minor role. Yeah. In evangelism, those people become Christians, and from the first moment, it also plays a minor role for them. Yeah, and of course, this are in many areas, these are our allies. Yeah, but this is the overall situation. This is why I said in Marseille, they just say the Cardinal represents the Catholic, Thomas represents the Catholic. The Orthodox will not be happy about a statement like this, but at least they have not included. Yeah, and then in a situation like this, I have no time to give a long declaration that this is not true, that there are other Protestants as well, and So why I say from the wrong country, because in Europe we have signs and situations that there are mainline churches who are giving up their former I wouldn't say liberal, I would say their secular stand, being proud of being very pretending that they are the peak of society and they are head of society, etc. That's changing here, but in the overall, in most of our countries, the traditional churches still hold positions of power and are not willing to give them up. So in the Vatican, we signed Christian witness in a multi-religious world, and we say, it even states there should be no state church, and the state should not be used to force people to belong to a certain way of Christianity. And then I go to Spain or to Italy itself, not to the Vatican, but to Italy. And in many places you find the old Catholic Church that still is in power, that has the control over things. It has the control over politics, that has a lot of money, and really doesn't care for this kind of statement. So we have this statement. The Italian Evangelical Alliance uses this statement, the Italian version, but they don't have the impression that this has anything to do with the reality of the Catholic Church in Italy. And rightly so. So this is our situation. The Protestant mainline churches here in Germany. This is where I grew up, and I don't see them as my enemy. Many evangelicals still are in those churches, but I just have to see they cling to. The Protestant faculties are paid by the state. They have the church tax. They are the richest churches in the world. Both the Catholic and the German, the Protestant church in Germany have a budget that goes by the billions, which is not standard around the world when it comes to churches. And at the same time, they lecture to us on poverty and on this, what we should do. They cling to this, and that gives the impression that we are somewhere between an unimportant minority and a sect. Officially, you don't call it a sect any longer, but in reality, you are still dealt with. So a high-ranking representative of a free church in Germany just told me that he invited church leaders over, and then at the end they wanted to do a photo. And he was asked to leave the photo because he was the only one with a normal suit. and they just wanted a photo with collars and hats and so on, so on, so. And he had to remind them, friends, I was the one that invited you. So, yeah, and that was for me somehow typical, clinging to things which do not play any role any longer. Yeah. And so people in Europe have the impression that still have the impression that Christianity is at the end, and the reality is that even in Europe, we have the situation that if you look who is leaving the churches, you could think Christianity is at the end. If you look at the numbers of evangelicals, that is not true. But you see, the thousands of Iranians that become Christians in Germany alone, and that's true in other countries too, they are not counted. I'm interested how many believers live on our soil. I don't care who their grandfathers and grandmothers were. But people just see this, and I see the same in the Middle East. People only say the Christianity is at the end, and of course it's a nightmare. We do what we can, both to stop the trend as well as to help those Christians that have to leave. Yes. But the reality is that for every historic Christian leaving the Middle East, we add 2 new believers in the underground, and they are not counted. Right. So the largest Protestant church in Iran is the Armenian Orthodox Church, with about 50,000. The Archbishop is he is a very good man. He's a very good leader in the situation. He's a long-term friend of mine. But we probably have somewhere between 1 million or 1.5 million people in the underground churches. So that is 20 and more times as many as this largest group. So in the moments the Armenians still can stay in Iran, but it's around the corner that they suddenly all have to leave. Okay, then I still have to say they have been replaced, but our people don't count. They count, of course, in the area. They even count for the Iranians themselves, who think very positive about the Christians in their country. But they don't count for politics, and they don't count for the European churches. Don't count them. So when I say I come from the wrong country, it is hard even to convince evangelicals in Germany that the world is not like Germany.
We suffer from Euro-tunnel vision. We measure everything from
I have to add, I have no special insight into God's plans. But if people give me numbers of when Islam will be a larger religion, then I don't know, and all those things, I have to say, even in my short lifetime, I have seen so many revivals changing the landscape of whole countries. Who would have thought that Indonesia one day would have something like 20 million Christians, Protestants, evangelicals, call them how you want, and that in the largest Muslim country, this happened without those people being killed. Who would imagine this? And this has changed the country. And now we have several Christians, meanwhile, who are governors of state in Indonesia. That is unforeseen. And yesterday, the Minister of Religion publicly endorsed religious freedom and promised the Christians that they are safe in Indonesia. Who would have thought that?
Just yesterday. Well, you've already started to answer my very last question, and let's just ask you to just give a couple of sentences on this. When you look at our world today with all its challenges, climate change, terrorism, multipolar world, etc., the rise of China, India, etc., artificial intelligence, populism, and nationalism, are you pessimistic or optimistic or something else?
when I read the Bible, I believe in what I call complementarity. I don't know a better word for it. Complementarity is the very academic, scientific way that two things can be true at the same time. Yeah. So light is, as you know, it's materia, and light is just running through the room without being materia. Yeah. And the brightest people in the world have come to the conclusion that both is true at the same time, but we cannot prove that is true at the same time, because our machines, our tools, only can prove the one thing or the other. Yeah. And I think that is built into Christianity. Jesus is God and is man, and it's true both at the same time. And we still only can say one thing after the other. We still speak about the Trinity, because we cannot say three in one at the same time. Yeah, we could say boo and mean with boo that three is one, but still, when we explain it, we have to say, and it's definitely true that this universe is created by a God who, on the one side, is one, and anything runs to this one point, that you have to see everything from this one thing, and who at the same time is three, and thus is diverse, and this builds into diverse gifts that the Holy Spirit gives to his people, etc., etc. Yeah? And I think that is true here too. The Bible, if I look in the New Testament, there is an incredible message of doom, and most of those messages in history somehow go back to Christianity. Yeah. And at the same time, there is an incredible message, an optimistic message, yeah?
Of hope.
Of hope that what you see will not be the last word.
Yeah? So it's like the wheat and the tares growing up together.
Yeah, yeah. And you name this example. This is a story of complementarity. Yeah? Yeah. And God says, because my kingdom is growing, those bad things are allowed to go on. Yeah. Yeah. And so this is exactly what I see. Islam, every religion has its extremist wing. Christianity had it. It was history, but 100 years ago, most Christians would have been convinced that you may use force to make people Christians. First World War, colonialism, I mean, that was the majority opinion. Try to make it the peaceful way, but if they do not make them happy by converting them anyway. And I have to admit that the Christian landscape of today is more the result of violence than of mission. Yeah.
Yes.
At the same, but this is history, gladly enough. Yeah. Most of Christianity nowadays is totally opposed to use violence to spread Christianity. Atheism, by the way, was very violent in Soviet times. We now have an age of a very peaceful atheism who denies that this had anything to do. And we have sad to say the two other large world religions, Hinduism and Islam, are going the opposite way. Yeah. Yeah. So, but who would have thought that the uprise of Islamism, of an extremist version of Islam, finally ending in 9/11, yeah, would lead to a revival under Muslims never seen before. Generations of missionaries have been waiting for it, and we all grow up with the idea God can do anything except in the Muslim world. Yeah?
More Muslims have come to faith in Isa, in Jesus, since 9/11 than in the rest of history.
Yes, yeah. So, and I sometimes joke saying that 9/11, that the conspiracy theories are all wrong, because 9/11 has been organized by the large mission society, the Christian mission societies, yeah, who wanted a breakthrough, because it's not only Islam. Yeah, in Europe, it stirred up the question, what is so different about Christianity? And since 9/11, Christianity has more a positive smell in Germany than a negative. Before 9/11, Christianity was the bad guy. We were blamed for more or less everything. Suddenly people start to think and at least ask the question. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we never would go for something like this. It's joking, saying that this was planned, yeah. But it's just the fact. I think the whole climate change issue really has brought up the idea this is a creation in a way that was unthinkable before. And I've secular politicians who tell me if we speak about saving creation, people listen and it's important for them. If we just say, if we don't use this wording, yeah. And it's funny that the Green Party in Germany really became big when they switched over and started to use the term to save creation, yeah. And I could give a lot of other things. I see situations in which evil gets so big that it is unthinkable. If I think of corruption, the amounts we are talking about are sometimes unbelievable. Yeah. At the same time, we have the largest movement ever against corruption. And there is, meanwhile, people say that corruption is a value everybody believes in. Yeah. There might be a lot of citizens in this world who wish they could get something from the corruption. But in principle, something which has been a minority opinion still 30, 40 years ago, that corruption is very evil and you should fight against this. Meanwhile, it's the opinion of the whole world. Yeah. And more rulers lose their power just because they are corrupt. If I think that even this corrupt president of South Africa had to leave, I mean, who cared about the corruption of leaders of communist parties some decades ago? Yeah, and suddenly his own party doesn't want this any longer. Yeah, and So it's slavery. We have people that become rich through slavery as never before. But on the other side, we have a fight against slavery and a successful fight against slavery. And our fight, our evangelical involvement in this is seen positive as never before. Yeah. So if I speak with UN people that we have the largest network of safe houses for former prostitutes, they know that's true. Yeah. And they see this very positive, that around the globe, evangelicals, Pentecostals, Baptists, I mean, all different movements. Youth with a Mission has built here in Germany, what is his name? Reinhard Bonke and his staff have built up those homes. Few people know about this because that's mostly secret, yeah. But we have this network around the globe. Of course, many of those prostitutes become Christians. We have in Berlin, we have a church that works with minor male prostitutes. Yeah. So young boys, they are in prostitution, normally having no family. Their life is at the end before it even started. And I'm very proud that we are the ones who care for them. Yeah. And homosexuality is always a very delicate topic. No one is criticizing this church because everybody knows nobody is caring for those boys. Yeah. And we invite them over, sit with them and talk. Yeah. So I see this both sides. And I would say when it comes to climate change, there is the potential that we destroy the world. We have this potential. Yeah. Whether it's an atomic bomb or too many cars or whatever it is, we have many options to destroy this world. And of course, I'm not a prophet. Perhaps that's God's timing, that things come to an end. At the same time, we all know we have the potential as never before to stop it. Yeah, we have the scientific developments, we have the political structure. The pandemic, COVID-19 was a good example. It was an attack on this world as never before, and it's not. I'm still not convinced that this is not human-made. We probably never will find out, but this is still a vital option. That was our experiments, that we released it to the world. At the same time, by God's providence, it came at a time when major researchers really had come to the point to find those vaccinations. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And those vaccinations have the potential to solve a lot of other illnesses around the world, where we didn't have any cure for so far. And I said to a specialist recently, isn't that funny? We have this COVID-19 now, and suddenly the money is there, and we find the cure. Yeah, and he said, you are totally wrong. These are projects that have been worked on for 40 decades. Yeah, and it is just by chance that they were very close to finding the solution, and the pandemic came. Yeah, if we would start this research nowadays, it would need 2 decades until we come to this point. Yeah. So I see this in God's hands. He reminds the world that how easily this world can come to an end, and we all die. And at the same time, he proves that humans are made in the image of God. Yeah. And can do unbelievable things because God has given them the way to think, the way to invent, the way to help other people, and no other being in this world can do this. No dog, no tree.
On that point, let's bring this tour de force to a close, because that's a very encouraging thought you've left us with. You've given us lots to think about. You've taken us around the world several times in all sorts of different ways. Thank you very much, Thomas. It's been a delight to listen to you tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for the invitation. I will ask for God's blessing for the Schuman Institute and for bringing this, how you recently called it, need for public theology back to the evangelicals in Europe. And I hope that this is part of reminding believers in our continent that God's history never is at the end, and that we are powerless as long as we do not rely on God and on the Holy Spirit. But when we trust in Him, things can happen we never imagined.
Thank you.